Out of the gates and ready to go. OutKick 360 underway. Glad you're with us. Great to have Chad Withrow back from Nebraska, back from the drive, especially with all the news to get to today in reaction, analysis, and just general thoughts in last night's scene and terrible injury and health status of Bills safety Damar Hamlin. Withrow, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Hutton. I missed you. It's been
Missed
a
you as
long
well.
time away. Mr. Musk, missed everything about you. The table's a lot lighter now. And we had all the holiday stuff up on the table. I just noticed that because
it's very jarring.
I normally hide my water behind something, and I had to move it further to the left. But now that that's out of the way, ready to go. Thanks to everyone who filled in while I was away on holiday break.
You could not be replaced.
Everybody did a good job. I also want to thank all of them for not doing too good of a job because having watched some of the shows, my job security is very, very safe. So I appreciate that they did just well enough at filling in for me during this time. And it's great to be back. And thank you for holding everything down and to our entire staff for holding it down also.
I'm the one who's happy you're back. And
You're the only one in here that's happy that I'm back, by the way.
Fair enough.
Everyone else is like, man, you got to deal with this guy again. Got Matty Ice over here making weird looks at me the whole time. Just angry that I'm back in studio.
Matty really came out of his shell. We've got, while you're out, I'm saying, you've got Chad back in the chat. You can join us on YouTube and streaming live at OutKick.com and across the OutKick network, and jam-packed with guests and reaction and just firsthand accounts of what happened last night with Monday Night Football and Bills safety Damar Hamlin collapsing after making a tackle and T. Higgins going to the ground. Hamlin gets up and then collapses roughly a second and a half, 2 seconds later. And we'll have Dr. David Chao, who is Pro Football Doc on social media and OutKick contributor. He joins us to give his contribution to the story and his overall analysis in real time from last night. Also, a bit later this hour, Armando Salguero. We previewed this game with him late last week. And this was the OutKick game of the week. He was there in Cincy, and we will get his firsthand account to everything that went down. But first and foremost, Chad, you can tell by the tone and the coverage and how fast you have the medical personnel around a player, how serious it is. And after the replay and the way he went down, you knew that this was more than just a traditional or typical injury to a player in the middle of the first quarter.
There's not much that we can add to the conversation in terms of the reaction, the human reaction to it. I think everyone that talked about it last night on ESPN, everyone that tweeted about it or posted anywhere on social media, all shared that similar human response to what was going on. It was horrific. I mean, you knew right away. It was very, very bad. I mean, it's not, and this is not being morbid, but you start immediately Googling, okay, what could this be? You know, you're looking at everything and you immediately fear the worst. And I think I was like, and I'm sure you were too, Hutton, just like everyone else in the immediate aftermath of it. I know recently at a Tennessee Titans game, you kind of talked to some people that would have been involved in this last night in terms of the mechanics of the game, which is obviously very secondary when all of this is going on. Now, ESPN going to break and coming back, and Joe Buck and Troy Aikman saying, there's nothing more to add. There's nothing more to say.
There is no information at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I could almost, having done games before, it sounded like a broadcast crew in an internal battle with their production truck saying, stop bringing it back to us, that we can't say anything else. Go to commercial, go to anyone else. Then they go back to the studio, and it's almost like, well, what do you want us to say? It was emotional. It was heart-wrenching to watch. It was a complete surprise to everyone, ESPN included. This is not me being critical of them. This is not something that's happened with this type of injury in a football game. It has happened in hockey before. We'll get into some incidents of that a little bit later. But it's just, I mean, it's heartbreaking to watch. But Hutton, I'm also watching this, and I see the scene in the stadium and teams getting together to pray together around Hamlin. And I think in all of this, through the tragedy, you see a lot of the benefits of sport. It's an institution unlike really any other in our country that has this uniting ability around a tragedy like this. We saw it with his charity going from 2,500 to over 4 million currently in donations. And I think that part of it, I don't want to lose sight of that. It's really cool to see that part of this also. And while we discuss the tragedy and give you updates from the family and give you updates on his condition right now as we get news, I do think it's important to also focus on the fact that this is something that has shown the best of us, that follow sports, that cover it, that watch it, that love it, that play it. When you watch that game last night, it really has shown the good side of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, a sporting event is where you find people that don't care who they're sitting next to, right? Like, and that was and Bills fans typically have had in times of really bad situations, they will donate to other teams' charities. And in this case, it was everyone across the country doing that for Damar Hamlin, where his toy drive, his community foundation toy drive, which had a goal of $2,500, is now at 4.5 and counting, 4.5 million and counting. And, it was in real time, you're watching it go from 250,000, 500,000, and still it continues to climb. It was under 4 whenever we arrived at the studio earlier today. Now it's 4.5. You're right. With all of those coming together, it is something that we should not forget. And we certainly are trying to keep tabs on all of the information that's coming out and in very small amounts on his condition. There is good news here where you have him stabilized in terms of his vital signs. That coming from the marketing team behind Damar Hamlin and behind many of the foundations that he's a part of. And the press conferences and the statements from the family earlier today, from the Damar Hamlin family. On behalf of our family, we want to express our sincere gratitude for the love and support shown to Damar during this challenging time. We are deeply moved by the prayers, kind words, and donations from fans around the country. We also want to acknowledge the dedicated first responders and healthcare professionals at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center who have provided exceptional care to Damar. We feel so blessed to be a part of the Buffalo Bills organization and to have their support. We also want to thank Coach Taylor and the Bengals for everything they've done. Your generosity and compassion mean the world to us. Please keep Damar in your prayers. We will release updates as soon as we have them. That from the Hamlin family earlier today.
I think also, you mentioned the two coaches involved here, true leadership from them in this whole time. I mean, in a very delicate situation, I thought Zach Taylor and Sean McDermott handled themselves and their teams and the entire situation with such class and did so with a quiet strength about it while showing compassion. I thought they handled themselves very well. That entire stadium, if you put 65,000 people in any setting, the thought is, we at OutKick, we show all the fights that happen in stadiums and everything else, and it's fun to watch. And I immediately come away thinking, well, there's an idiot in every group, and there's always going to be something like this that happens when you combine that many people with alcohol and passion about sports and everything else. When that game was announced as over for the night, I'm thinking, please, God, don't boo if you're Cincinnati or if you're anyone. It was silent. Everyone was respectful. Everyone was respectful during that time. They would come back, have cameras on at Hutton, sound was up, and I didn't hear anyone saying anything negative or booing or doing anything of the sort. There were no idiots at the game last night. I just think it's so many parts of this story as we all continue to obviously think about Damar Hamlin, his family, and pray for him and pray for recovery. I keep coming back to it's such a uniting factor that you can see something like that. I marveled at what was going on. We're going to talk to Armando Salguero, who was there, and he can give us a firsthand account of what that press box was like when this was happening and what the stadium sounded like. But just watching it live as it went to break and came back and they were getting updates, I really thought it was pretty miraculous to see the setting around that game.
Yeah, and they have protocols. They have the best first responders, and for every area of the medical profession, they are there on site in case of emergency. And in many cases, we've never seen anything like this. But I mean, you have them there in a situation like this, and that's where the first responders there last night and everything that took place in the moment with CPR that happened immediately, and the ability to get him oxygen and to make sure that he had a pulse before they took him off the field. I mean, in an everyday walk of life, you're not getting that, right? Like if it happens, it happens. And last night, it sounds crazy. The best possible situation, if you're going to have a medical alert incident, is to be around the experts in that moment and how fast they can work and react and what they're trained to do in a life or death situation. And that's what this was. This went from, is this player going to return to the game in just immediate split-second reaction, there's someone down on the field, to this is way more serious than anyone thought or anyone has seen before in terms of a player collapsing on the field in real time while making a play.
I think the first reaction for me was get up, get up, get up, please stand up at some point to, I hope he's breathing, because there's just no updates. And there's so many medical personnel around, you can't see a thing. And that was the scary part throughout the whole thing, was there was no updates on whether, not even if he's moving, but is he breathing? Is there a pulse? What exactly is going on? There was so much confusion. That's why we're going to go to the experts to clear up possibly some of that confusion.
We start with Pro Football Doc, Dr. David Chao, who joins us, former team doctor for the Chargers, now a contributor with OutKick as well. Dr. Chao, good to speak with you. Thank you for the time. Hope all is well. Chad and I have been discussing the medical issue and exactly what happened with the cardiac arrest last night with Damar Hamlin. What did you see in real time from what we were all able to see while watching Monday Night Football?
Well, let me tell you, I joined on and heard some of your stuff, and your commentary is already right on. You got a doctor right there next to you, Chad. I mean, yeah, he's done a pretty good job there. Now, here's the thing. When that happened, that was horrific looking, right? When the tackle happened at first, I was like, yeah, it's kind of routine tackle. And then you see he's down. I said, gee, what happened? Did I miss it? Did he hit his head? What happened? And they showed the replay of him standing up and then falling down. And I was like, that's clearly cardiac. And at the time, I had no idea all the CPR, but when all the thing came up about CPR and all this other stuff, it was very, very scary. It was not fun. It was not comfortable. And so I just wanted to provide some people some things, some background information. And you're right. If you're going to collapse, unless you're in a hospital or in an emergency room, there's no better place than an NFL field. It's witnessed. People are there to help you immediately. There are up to 24 medical professionals between both sidelines in a coordinated effort. You meet pregame to talk about it. The Bengals did a great job because they're responsible for the home field care. They drill for this in the preseason. You know, there's someone, emergency doctor who's in charge. There's someone starts CPR. Someone gets the spine board for compressions. You start the IV, the medications, the oxygen. Everyone has a task. And I can't speak more highly than the great job that they did. And as scary as it looked, I'm not trying to speculate on the injury of the young man or the whole deal, but, you know, just to give people some hope and some background and some framework of the incident, I'm actually relatively, fingers crossed, keep the prayers coming, optimistic that we hopefully will have a happy outcome.
Is that just based on the small updates that we've already received at this portion of the time that's elapsed since he collapsed? And what is the medical term for what happened in real time and the hit that caused this?
Well, I don't want to get too much into speculation, but certainly the hit made sense. And most likely it was related to something called the cardiac contusion and a portion of what's called commotio cordis. Now, I'm not a cardiologist, but as a head team physician, I talk to our primary care guys and so forth. And I talked to Dr. Grau, who's head of Ottawa Heart Institute, about it as well. Commotio cordis is very rare. It's like a very unlucky hit to the wrong spot of the chest at the exact millisecond of I won't get into the EKG wave that sets it awry and causes the heart attack. The heart, not to stop moving, but to stop beating in a way that can deliver blood. It's just fibrillating. It's not doing anything meaningful. and you need to do immediate CPR and the AED devices. Look, teams travel with the AED devices wherever they go. I mean, when we went, there was someone assigned to bring it on the airplane and on the buses. Okay, and so each sideline has one, and this defibrillator and the quick action probably saved this young man's life between the Bengals and the Bills, and it's kudos to them. And look, I've come on the show and talked about it with you. It's a hard job, and the NFL sometimes wrongly and sometimes rightfully gets criticized for concussion protocol issues. But I think anyone who's criticized the NFL for concussion protocols should give kudos here to the way this emergency action plan worked out and what they did and how quickly and smoothly it really went. A horrifying situation, making the best of it. I'm hoping, expecting for good news, partly because I'm always an optimist, partly because I want to deliver good news, partly maybe because I want to speak good things into existence. But from a medical perspective, I was putting together for OutKick last night, and we do provide some updates at Sports Injury Central. No one's trying to get clicks here. We're just trying to provide some support from people that are hurting and very fearful. The reasons for some potential optimism. Medical staff got there so quickly, all the things that were there, but also one sign that I hope I wasn't reading too much into is the ambulance stopped in the tunnel and waited for mom, apparently. You don't do that if you're continuing chest compressions. You don't do that if the patient is unstable. And it was great to hear from the Bills. And then, of course, everyone got worried because there was, quote, no update coming. And I said on Twitter, and it had nothing to do with the football game, I said, I hope to God that they actually restart and play this game, because I knew there was no possible way they could restart or finish this game without knowing Damar Hamlin was okay. That wasn't happening. So if they restarted the game, that would be just, that's like the thumbs up when you're going off on the spine board, right? If that happens, maybe you can restart the game. But so I was rooting for a restart of the game for that reason, meaning that they knew good news behind the scenes. And when it didn't happen, it was very worrisome. But when the Bills tweeted out cardiac arrest, which is kind of what we thought, and his heart was restarted on the field, that gives me really good hope. Look, he's not out of the woods. He's still critical. The breathing tube, to me, is neutral. It's not bad news. That's what you do when you're in the ICU. You control their breathing, okay? And because they got to him quickly, God forbid, I really hope and expect that there's no brain damage, right? Because they got to him really quick. And this commotio cordis is indeed deadly. OutKick listeners should not Google it. It's deadly because when it happens in an open field, or when you get struck by a soccer ball or a lacrosse ball or kicked in, unluckily, there aren't dozens of medical personnel around in an AED. I'm a huge advocate for having athletic trainers at all sporting events, high school and otherwise, with any chance of contact. A physician if possible, but definitely an AED, and not locked up in the school nurse's office. I mean, on the sideline, on the field, accessible. And that's why you see it in airports and other things. Those are things that can help make a difference there. And it really meant a lot to me to see that Buffalo Bills tweet. I hope I'm not reading too much into it, and I'm not trying to speculate. I'm just trying to spread some hope and optimism in a tough situation.
This is terrific analysis, and exactly why we asked Dr. David Chao to join us here on OutKick 360. And Doctor, I'm not asking you to speculate on this, but we heard it from Damar Hamlin's family, thanking those first responders, thanking those medical professionals out there. I'm watching this. I'm a layman. I didn't go to medical school. I don't work in these high-pressure situations where you're out there trying to save a life, and I'm thinking that has got to be so difficult to keep your composure and do exactly what you need to do and do it quickly in a situation like that. You're a team doctor.
Well,
you had this job. What is the protocol when you run out onto the field and you see immediately that someone has suffered cardiac arrest, and how quickly does everything need to happen, not just with the team physician, but all support personnel around them?
Oh, Oh, you give the signal, you start CPR. It happens very, very quickly, and that's the whole point of it. And look, I don't know. I'm sure you guys didn't see it. When I went on Twitter live last night a little bit, I felt like I needed to, because if this upset me this much, I mean, how much is upsetting the regular viewer? And I wanted to provide some comfort and some background. And in some ways, it's almost easier if you have a job to do. It's harder when you're watching. I didn't like it at all watching. And we've had one time, we never had this happen in my entire career, but there was a chain gang member, an older gentleman, who collapsed on the sideline of a game. And we started some CPR type things. And I didn't get emotional because it's like, you got a job to do, right? And thankfully he was fine too. But here, when you're just watching, you think about your kids and whatever, and the extended football family. It's very emotional. But let me tell you that it happens instantaneously, and it happens multifaceted. This is why you drill for it in the preseason. You meet about it, meet everyone ahead of time. Literally, one person is starting CPR, one person is signaling for the other team. The other team was already halfway out there. I saw the head athletic trainer who's did a great job there for the Bengals as the home and host team, already out there. And then here comes the paramedics. Here comes the emergency doctor onto the field. Here comes the medicine bag and cart, the IV supplies, the oxygen mask, the spine backboard, someone starting the IV. It literally is, it's complicated. I mean, it's like diagramming an NFL play. Everyone has a job to do, and to do it immediately. And they really did it seamlessly. So, and honestly, I really think they saved their life. And I'm glad that so far, fingers crossed, that we're in a good spot right now. We need to continue to get into even a better spot related to the breathing tube, but that's probably, quote, routine for someone who's in the ICU. And hopefully we'll see that removed later today, or more likely tomorrow morning, and continue to hear the trickle of good news. And I hope that's what happens. But in the meantime, I don't want to speculate on the specifics, but there are precedences. I mean, Christian Eriksen, the Swedish soccer player, earlier this year had a sudden cardiac arrest, and the defibrillator saved him. That was a different situation. He didn't suffer a blow to the chest, and a lot of people opined he'd never play again. And for OutKick, I wrote, well, if he has an ablation procedure, this, that, the other, he could play again. There's possibilities, and he's back playing, thankfully, and healthy. And Christian, I think his name is Christian Pronger, a hockey player Pronger, in 1979. Yep. Chris Pronger, thank you, Chris Pronger. He tweeted out that, was it 1979? He had this commotio cordis, 1998, was out for weeks, and dropped on the ice. 1998. Okay, thank you. But he went on to a 12-year hockey career after that. So I'm not trying. No one's worried about football right now for this gentleman. No one's worried about the playoff scenarios and when you're going to make up this game. I get all that, but I'm just trying to provide some overall picture hope here. The most critical time on field was handled brilliantly, and we'll see what happens. And by the way, I did see a lot of people and friends and family asked me, and a lot of people on social media said, what took so long with the ambulance? Why the 9 minutes of CPR? Why didn't you load him and go, and sirens blaring? That's just not how it's done. It's safer on the field with dozens of medical personnel and equipment than it is in the back of a moving ambulance with 2, maybe 3 people in the back, okay? And rule of thumb is you never transport someone unless you can stabilize them. Now, if you had no way to stabilize them, then get them in the ambulance and let's go, right? As fast as you can. But they had ways to stabilize them, and they did stabilize them. And so it made sense to do the CPR there and then load him when he was stable in the ambulance. And I thought last night it was a great, great sign about it waiting in the tunnel for mom. Because if you're actively doing CPR and you're unstable, you're not waiting for mom.
Dr. David Chao has been our guest. Great perspective, Doc. We appreciate you. He's Pro Football Doc on socials. Great website there, and great contribution to OutKick.com. As news progresses, if we learn more, we will be reaching out again. So we appreciate the time.
Yeah, and and I appreciate you guys at OutKick reaching out, and I appreciate, quote, our fearless leader, Clay Travis, because here's the thing. There was a time last night where I was like, I don't want to say anything. I'm not a cardiologist. I'm just an orthopedist. But then I thought, you know what? If we're doing injury analysis, no one else can say this stuff. And look, don't worry about the fear. I mean, I didn't want to upset people by saying stuff, but there's ways to jump in a classy way, and I hope that we did it. And I have to thank you guys and Clay for teach a little fearless and just do the right thing and let it sort out. And hopefully we're doing that here.
Yeah, that's why we wanted you on to lead the show today.
I feel better and more informed now, so we appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be chatting later this week for sure. Thank you, man. All right, there's Dr. David Chao, the former team doctor for the Chargers, now with Pro Football Doc and OutKick.com. Coming up, Armando Salguero was there on the scene last night in Cincy covering this game for OutKick. We'll discuss the timeline, the reaction, what was going on in the press box, the information or lack thereof, and just the overall coverage of this, because Armando's night ended with coverage from the hospital. That's next on OutKick 360.
In the latest edition of the Trey Wallace podcast, I am Trey Wallace, happy to be joined by Saturday Down South national columnist, correspondent, you name it. He does everything. Connor O'Gara, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's nice to do a little home and home with you. Had you on the Saturday Down South podcast last week, be able to come on your show this week. I feel like there's like a million things that we can talk about as we get into bowl season. So yeah, man, I guess because I went in like 12 different directions with you, so it's only fitting that we probably do the same with me.
No, man, it happens. And we're getting into the crazy part of bowl season, kind of like, the mid-majors are out of the way. Now we're starting to get some of the bigger games that folks can get excited about towards the future, starting on like Friday. And you get a nice matchup Friday night with Tennessee, Clemson, a couple other matchups scattered, throughout the day, then getting into Saturday. If we're looking outside of Ohio State and Georgia and TCU, Michigan, are there two or three games that stand out to you? They're like, okay, these have little implications towards maybe the 2023 season.
How about South Carolina, Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl? Really interested to see the way that this plays out for Spencer Rattler, somebody who has just had a season that I don't know if there's a recent comp to it where, man, after those first 10 games, everybody who was low on Spencer Rattler was like, see, this is why this was never going to work. What a horrible decision. South Carolina kind of wasted a year with all these great skill players, a lot of Marcus Satterfield hate. And now, just like that, after the 2 games that Spencer Rattler had, he's got a chance to do something very unique. And I wonder how that impacts his NFL draft status. I wonder if he is deciding based on how he performs in this game and the feedback that he gets, if he's coming back for another year. Shane Beamer would love to be able to move past sort of the awkwardness of these last few weeks with Marshawn Lloyd, Jaheim Bell entering the transfer portal. So I've got a lot of attention on that game. And then obviously against the Notre Dame team that's had a very herky-jerky year in itself for year one of the Marcus Freeman era. So looking forward to that. And then a game that I'm going to be at right after I come back from the Peach Bowl will be the ReliaQuest Bowl, which I still want to call the Outback Bowl because come on, let's
the Outback Bowl.
It's still the Outback Bowl. Like let's be real. But yeah, seeing the way that Zach Arnett responds to a very atypical situation. I think it was Ross Dellinger who said this is the first time that a sitting head coach has died while active since like Randy Walker 2006. I mean, This is very strange to see this set of circumstances. Fortunately for Zach Arnett, a few weeks to be able to prepare. We know that he had full autonomy on that side of the ball on defense. So you would hope that Mississippi State with a veteran quarterback in Will Rogers is going to be ready to go. I don't think they're losing that football game. I just don't. I'm kind of amazed that the spread is only Mississippi State -1, seeing as how Illinois is not going to be playing with Chase Brown, who's kind of the heart and soul of that offense. So I'm really looking forward to being able to see the way that Mississippi State responds. But yeah, there's intrigue. You want to get into Kentucky and Iowa, the rock fight that could happen there.
Are they going to get the 31 points. Like, that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. Well, they hit it.
How's that, dude? How's that over under not in the 20s? It's going to be bad, but I'm looking forward to it. That's got the sickos committee written all over it.
It's one of those games where, and I put it in a column that I had written this week. It's like, okay, what are you getting out of the offenses? You have no idea. Are you going to get something out of the Kentucky running game? Okay, well, that's going to be interesting and hard to find out.
Armando Salguero joins us as we welcome you back to OutKick 360 across the OutKick network. Great coverage and on-site coverage last night of the horrific collapse and heart attack by Bills safety Damar Hamlin, and then the coverage and the reaction in real time from everyone outside of the hospital there in Cincinnati. Armando, thank you for the time, man, and you've certainly put a great perspective on this from your vantage point and your ability to have boots on the ground and report on this story for OutKick. How are you?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you guys having me on as always. And yeah, it's been a rough, what, 18 hours or so. And obviously, Damar Hamlin and his family are in the thoughts and prayers of everyone around the NFL, including all 32 NFL teams who moments ago switched their Twitter profile photos to, pray for Damar, number 3 in Bills jersey. This includes teams that don't necessarily always like the Buffalo Bills, but this whole thing is just goes beyond rivalries and goes beyond football. This is life and death, gentlemen.
Yes, absolutely. And you could tell immediately that was the case within a matter of seconds, the urgency. And with that in mind, there was a ton of criticism about the lack of news and reporting. But just to give some perspective on that, just from the ESPN all the way down to just the reporters there on site, it's very rare that you have this happen in midfield. Normally, something would be on the sideline. There's a sideline reporter. It goes to the tunnel. Then you've got updates in real time. What was it like being in the press box and trying to find out information that no one had because all of the personnel, they're at midfield and it's not taking place in earshot of anyone on the sideline?
Right. So what normally happens, Jonathan, is when a player is injured in game, soon after that player is taken off the field, either walking off under his own power or by cart or in any manner that it happens, there's a call down protocol where the team who that player belongs to finds out from its sideline representative what the deal is. And then if the team is a visiting team, that visiting team will call the home team so that the home public address announcer can report to the entire press box, it's thus and such injury and is thus and such status, questionable, out, doubtful, whatever. There was none of that last night. There was no announcement of an injury other than for the fact that we all have eyes and we saw what was going on, and 32 ESPN television camera angles were covering the whole thing in real time. It was frustrating, but I understand, hey, I don't want anyone to think that it was frustrating for a reporter or me personally. It's frustrating because we were unable to present you with information that might somehow make this situation make sense. Because if it's an ankle, I honestly, we don't find out until the next day, we're good. But this kid was not breathing on his own. His heart was not beating regularly. And we all saw, I have binoculars that I bring to every game. For 8 minutes, they were doing exigent measures to bring his heartbeat back to normal. 8 minutes of CPR. There was they brought out the paddles to help him. You see that, and it's jarring, gentlemen. It really is. It is. I've never seen it in all of my years covering the NFL. I started covering the NFL in 1990. I hope I never see it again, because that was chilling.
Armando, it's jarring to me to see the reaction of the stadium and just how still everything felt on television. You were there. What was the scene like, not just in the press box, but looking out at the stadium in Cincinnati? I didn't see a lot of people sitting down or moving from their seat to go to the concession stand. It was very, very surreal watching it on TV. What was your interpretation of it?
Numbed. The stadium was numbed. It was people standing there, not saying anything. You got to understand, Chad, and I think we all do, these folks came out to have a good time. And some of them got well lathered up before the game. And some of them were getting that way during the game. And it was raucous, and it was going to get rowdy and rowdier. And in one play, a hush fell upon that stadium, and it lasted not for a little while. It lasted all the way up until the moment where the PA announcer told the crowd the game is, canceled. The game is postponed. Not suspended, because there was 2 announcements on that. The first announcement was temporarily suspended, and that's when the teams headed back to their locker room to figure things out. We're talking half an hour later, and this whole situation was in stunned silence half an hour after the temporary, suspension, and folks were still quiet. And that's when it was finally announced that the game was being canceled. Eventually, people started leaving and going, wherever it is that they needed to go. But I don't know. Like I said, don't want to relive that.
Describe the scene for us as you made your way to the hospital, and the scene outside with the fans who made their way over there, and the sentiment that you were able to pick up on.
So it was raining, and it wasn't super cold, but it was not warm. It was chilly. And in the rain that was steady, and outside of a darkened hospital, entrance area, because it's not like they've got a lot of street lights around there. I don't know why, but there was maybe 30 Bills and Bengals fans milling about. There was a group over at a corner that was praying. I think you see that right now. In unison, they're wearing Bengals jerseys and Bills jerseys. I talked to this one young woman from Virginia Beach, Virginia, who had driven 11 hours to come see her team play in Cincinnati. And And I said to her, did you ever expect, to detour into a visit to the hospital during this trip? And why are you here? And she said, well, because we show up. We show up to the airport when the team wins. We show up to the airport when the team loses. We show up to home games. We show up to away games. We show up. These people matter to us, and it's not just because they play football. They matter to us as people. And I'm like, so I asked her, so are you hurting? And she said, yeah, we're hurting. We're not just hurting because, the Bills may have lost a good player. We're hurting because we don't know if this 24-year-old guy who is supposed to be at some point somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's uncle, somebody's cousin, somebody's son, we don't know if he's ever going to walk out of this hospital. And when you hear stuff like that and that sort of perspective, you understand why she had tears in her eyes. You understand why, everyone around the NFL is jarred today, because that was the nightmare scenario for the NFL and any pro sports league, to have an athlete fighting for his life during a sporting competition.
Armando Salguero in Cincinnati last night when Bill safety Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field. Final minute here, Armando, what is the latest from the NFL as of right now?
Right. So the NFL has said that it will not reschedule this game for this week, but it holds back a right to make a decision on that later on. Week 18 goes forward as scheduled. So the Bills will play their game as scheduled. Supposedly, the Bengals will play their season finale as scheduled. And that's all that they are able to say right now, because like everyone else, they're waiting for results from the hospital and word from the hospital as to what exactly Damar Hamlin is going through, where he's at, and where he's likely to end up.
For the very latest coverage, head to OutKick, and Armando's got you covered there with this story from last night and moving forward with every update that comes out. Armando, thank you for the perspective, man. Great job with this.
All right, man. Thank you.
Armando Salguero, our senior NFL writer and columnist for OutKick.com.
So part of that NFL conference call last night, Troy Vincent was asked about the ESPN report during the broadcast about a 5-minute break and then restarting the game, and basically said, I have no idea where they heard that. That wasn't coming from us. Joe Buck has a different side of the story that he's now come out and told. We'll get into that when we come back.
This is OutKick 360.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys, because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well, with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say, more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam. So that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had to actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But, they just, I don't know, they just were different folks. And it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy is literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, oh, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for a while. So you're trying to make do of it and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. Granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around. And everything else, at a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
Coming up, John McClain will join us. He's covered the league for nearly 5 decades and will give perspective on last night's Monday Night Football game, the pause of the game, and then the decision to postpone last night's Week 17 matchup. That's coming up in about 30 minutes. Chad, the coverage from ESPN, initially they discussed the 5-minute warm-up period. That was very brief, but that was the initial report, was that they were going to resume the game, and it would happen right after a 5-minute warm-up on the field.
Yeah, I remember it vividly because I was shocked when I heard that, and then they kind of showed the players stirring, but the moment that Joe Buck said it, Sean McDermott and Zach Taylor met with the officials. They both walked to midfield and started talking with the officials again, and that's when you started to see, okay, they're going to go to the locker room now, and that wasn't going to happen. So Joe Buck said this on air. Well, if you remember, and you can read about it in Armando Salguero's story at OutKick.com, Troy Vincent in the league's conference call is claiming he has no idea where that came from because it did not come from the NFL. Well, Joe Buck tells Andrew Marchand of the New York Post that, in fact, it was relayed to rules analyst John Perry, who was in direct communication with the league. ESPN has followed up Joe Buck's statement to the New York Post, saying, quote, there was constant communication in real time between ESPN and league and game officials. As a result of that, we reported that we were told in the moment and immediately updated fans as new information was learned. This was an unprecedented, rapidly evolving circumstance. All night long, we refrained from speculation. This is as part of, obviously, a much bigger story with Damar Hamlin's well-being, an interesting back and forth between a league and its media partner on this, where it looks like the NFL is trying to wash their hands of it, saying, I have no idea why they said that. And you have ESPN and Joe Buck saying, you told us that. That's why we reported it on air in the moment.
Well, I wish ESPN would get specific on who it was. The NFL at every game.
They just say the league.
Right, but they have a NFL observer who sits in the press box. They listen to the network broadcast, but what they're really doing is they are there in a time of emergency. It could be a medical emergency for a player like we saw last night. It could be a lightning delay. A tornado that comes through the city at the exact time you're about to kick off. It could also be what happened in Nashville a couple of weeks ago with the power outages and the surges. Those people are directly on the ground in direct communication in real time with Commissioner Roger Goodell, who is the only person, based on the bylaws of the league, he is the only person who can push back the time. He has to sign off on that, of kickoff, resume the game in a situation like this, or postpone the game until further notice, which is what happened last night, where they gave no update on what was to come, and they still haven't told us if the game is going to be resumed at any point, and that Week 18 has not been postponed. That being said, the protocol for, let's say, someone who has someone breaks their leg, and which we have seen a couple of times in real time, aircast. After a certain amount of time without play on the field, the protocol would be for a 5-minute warm-up prior to resuming play. And my guess is nothing nefarious is going on here. They're looking at the protocol, and that's what's on the protocol. There is nothing for what happened last night in a situation of cardiac arrest on the field, at midfield, while resuscitation and oxygen is being administered. So, the teams got together. As far and as long as it takes to get back to the press box with that, it was probably being discussed on the field, and that's why you saw, as Joe Buck is discussing it, the coaches coming together with the white hat, the lead official, who is there with the NFL observer in constant communication. They can speak in a situation like this on what the commissioner wants to do.
I wonder how much of it in real time was happening so fast, and how much the league being Goodell, who, as you mentioned, is the only one with the power to sign off on big moves like that, but how much Roger Goodell is just reporting back, hey, here's the protocol, but if this is a situation where the teams are uncomfortable playing, we're not going to play. We're going to defer, and I'll make my decision based on what each coach says about their team. So in real time, everyone could be telling the truth here, and that Joe Buck is just repeating what Perry's telling him through the league observer there about this is the protocol.
If that's who it was.
And then they start to do it, and then that's when you see the two coaches come together with the lead official, and they decide, we're not going to do this. Our team doesn't want to play. They're emotionally wrecked after this, so we're going to go in the locker room, and you guys can figure it out. All of those factors may be true, and the league office in New York could have been relying on people on the ground as far as how they should proceed.
Yeah, and they had to in that situation.
Yes.
The point person in communication, and the fact that it's unprecedented, both sides are saying that in this regard, and it continues to be, and how we are reacting and observing this in real time less than 24 hours later. We continue to do that as we kick off hour number 2. The latest headlines there, plus John McClain.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking there's going to be practice the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude. The Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point. It felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Hour number 2, OutKick 360 rolls on from 6th and Peabody. Glad you're with us across the OutKick network, streaming at OutKick.com and across this great radio platform with Chad Withrow, who is back. We are discussing
it's good to be back.
The reaction and just our overall thoughts with the cardiac arrest that took place last night on the field, Monday Night Football in Cincinnati with Bills safety Damar Hamlin. We're talking about it just like everyone is across the country and how it has spanned more than just the NFL fan base with this and the coverage and the health and well-being of a person, not a football player in this regard.
A 24-year-old person, too.
And the hit, which we've never seen before as a football fan watching this. You know, it's the protocols in place and the discussion points of why this occurred, what is this, what about that hit made this a cardiac arrest in many eyes. We've had great discussion earlier in the show. Armando Salguero from OutKick was at the stadium and then on the ground at the hospital late last night with great coverage and analysis and spot-on reporting for OutKick.com. And Pro Football Doc, Dr. David Chao, also joined us in hour number 1. If you missed that, you can download the audio wherever you get your audio just by clicking shows, drop down, and you can find us there at the site as well, OutKick.com. Chad, the latest from the league came from Commissioner Roger Goodell, and the NFL update from the commissioner's office. The NFL continues to be in regular contact with the medical team caring for Damar Hamlin, and also the Bills and Bengals organizations and the NFL Players Association. After speaking with both teams and NFLPA leadership, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell informed the clubs today that the Bills-Bengals game will not be resumed this week. The NFL has made no decision regarding the possible resumption of the game at a later date. The league has not made any changes to the Week 18 regular season schedule. We will continue to provide additional information as it becomes available. This is in real time. They are trying to make a determination on what to do without. It's very similar to last night in the locker rooms, where we pick up where we left off, Chad, with our discussion in hour 1, when they left the field and they were going to be more or less the way ESPN worded it, standby. You know, they're going to go back and regroup in the locker rooms. Well, at the time, they have to wait on the league to make a determination on what they are going to do or what they're not going to do. And we're still in that waiting period, so to speak, as you know, so the Bills players, they left last night for Buffalo, left Cincinnati. Bills players who wanted to stay in Cincinnati were allowed to stay, and players and personnel who wanted to travel back, the charter plane that was going to leave Cincinnati anyway post-game, they were allowed to travel back to their home city for the team of Buffalo.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it, Hutton. They're trying to figure this out as they go, just like the rest of us that's talking about this story, covering it. If you're a player or coach on one of these teams, you know how to handle this. It's also not completely unprecedented. This situation specifically is, but I'm sure I, like a lot of people, when I saw this happening and there was 9 minutes of CPR, I went to Google and said, has this ever happened before in NFL history? And it has. Chuck Hughes in 1971 collapsed dead on the field during an NFL game for the Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions in Chicago taking on the Bears. The Lions were in a 2-minute drill with 1:21 left, and Chuck Hughes, jogging back to the huddle, collapsed and went into convulsions and died. Dick Butkus was in that game for the Bears, was the first to spot him, called for medical personnel to come on the field. Now, very different in that they took him off on a stretcher and then went to the hospital. He was pronounced dead at 5-something that afternoon. They played out the last minute 28 of the game. So there were no delays, no games postponed. They played the next week. That they kept on going. 28 years old and a heart attack with Chuck Hughes. So I know a lot of people probably had that same question. Has this ever happened? Because I couldn't immediately think of a famous moment where this had happened in an NFL game. In college football back in the day, Teddy Roosevelt was put in charge of trying to end deaths in football and make the game safer for college football. So it's happened in the game of football in a much more brutal time, but that's the only incident of someone actually dying during an NFL game. And again, fingers crossed, prayers, everything. That's not the case right now with Damar Hamlin. And if you heard our interview with Dr. David Chao, Pro Football Doc, you would probably be a little bit more optimistic that that's not going to be the case here as well, and that's what we hope for. But I did find that interesting that this has happened before in NFL history. I thought with ESPN's coverage of this, Hutton, they were every bit as shocked and had no idea what to do as I would have imagined. I was honestly maybe a little bit surprised they weren't quicker to either throw to some different sort of programming or go to people more prepared to talk about it from a doctor standpoint or something else. I felt like it was a lot of people in a situation where they're saying, everything's been said that we can say. We're all upset watching it. We don't know what you want us to say, but yet you have time to fill. So Susie Colbert, ask Adam Schefter about it. Ask Booger McFarland about it. Go back to them. And then every time they went to Joe Buck, it was a lot more of, said everything we need to, so we're going to go back to another break.
Yeah, and I mean, at some point, you can only say so much about information that you're not going to speculate about. Only what's in front of you. And because of just the protocols in place and where it happened on the field, no one's in earshot of anything. And I think that was the difficulty in trying to figure out what was going on over the course of that 10-minute or so span before they went back to the locker rooms. And that's where you had Lisa Salters and others chiming in from there. Keep in mind, too, this is also a simulcast on ABC. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, we did not see the
ABC News?
No, ABC. It was on local. I was watching this game on local ABC last night.
Saying, are you saying that you were surprised they didn't go to ABC News coverage?
I'm surprised. Like, they didn't have a medical expert on.
Yeah, that's
especially considering I think they went away from ABC's coverage at 11 o'clock Eastern, and that's why Ryan Clark was on last night and available, because he was a part of the ABC coverage of the reaction in real time, reporting on the ground. Also, all the reporting and the news was coming out as the reporters in the area who are not at the game are arriving to the Cincinnati hospital, because it's difficult to get out of the press box, go down to the tunnel while the teams are going. Are they going to resume the game? Are they not? It's hard to get out of that stadium to begin with how you have the different traffic mechanisms that are in place, ingress, egress, which is the case at many stadiums across the country. And so if you're on standby for the police reports or whatever that's coming in on the news desk that day, you can hop over to the hospital fairly quickly. And that's what we were seeing on Twitter in real time last night.
Yeah, look, I'm not being critical of ESPN or anyone that was on air last night or their producers. I just think there was this rush to, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Great job. I thought they had a very human response. I don't think it was good, particularly. I didn't think any of the coverage was good because
of it were.
No one could say much. I mean, I thought the human response was, again, it was what everyone sitting at home was thinking and feeling. So in terms of commiseration, it worked from a television standpoint. It wasn't particularly informative. It was not organized. I just didn't think it was good, the way people are rushed out and say it was good. I'll tell you who was good, Scott Van Pelt. I thought postgame was terrific, and that's where Ryan Clark, I know, joined him also. But I thought, and that doesn't surprise me because he's great, but I thought his tenor, the information he was bringing to the table, his analysis, talking about it, that was 10 out of 10. It was clear to me that it was a scramble last night, and no one really knew how to handle it or what to do. And I think there were producers in the background that didn't know what to do, but they knew they had to be on air.
Well, it starts with the NFL.
They're on ESPN. They're on, I mean, it's everyone involved. You got Joe Buck saying, well, the ESPN is telling our guy that it's going to be a 5-minute break. We say that. Then we look stupid when they break to go to the locker room. And then Troy Vincent comes back and says, well, no one said that in the NFL. Again, I'm not being critical. I'm just stating facts that it was outside of the medical personnel that were terrific in responding to this. Everyone else was in scramble mode. Everyone else.
And keep in mind, the fact that Schefter was not getting updates on this while he's sitting on the desk. As free agency starts, you've got he's got 3 phones on the desk.
He would have his phone out like this right here, just getting updates as he's doing it.
They refuse to speculate on anything. And I think in large part that's probably what the medical experts that you could have reached out to in real time last night were doing, because they were not there. and they did not want to speculate in a life or death situation like they could pull from if you wanted to go to, and we've been in this situation, a player that we're on the call for goes down in a serious injury, and you have medical personnel on the field, and you're just trying to fill time, but you don't know what's going on. And in that case, I thought that was about as good as they could do, considering the fact that they were not going to speculate on what was happening.
Yeah, and I guess to round this out, what I'm saying is if you wanted information last night, you were going to get it on Twitter.
Yes.
More so than on ESPN. And Dr. Chao was almost apologetic that, hey, I did a Twitter Live and talked about. That's what I want.
Yeah.
I don't want to speculate. I'm not a cardiologist. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I spoke to a cardiologist this morning that I'm buddies with who told me all about commotio cordis. They have no problem speculating, saying this looks like textbook commotio cordis because of where the hit happened and the reaction to it. I have no issue with that. They're not saying I know for a fact. We all know they're not there. They're not treating the patient. But I think a little bit of illustration with that with an actual medical expert, there's nothing wrong with that when you see something on video and say, this is what I believe it is. I'm not stating it as fact because I'm not there with them, but I've seen this before, and that's what it looks like. And that's how we learned the term commotio cordis.
Going back to Damar Hamlin, from the Pittsburgh area and born and raised there, and Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin spoke on Hamlin, and he's a young man who he's known since the age of 12.
I'll say this about Damar Hamlin. Man, it's a really personal thing for me, being a Pittsburgher, and that young man being a Pittsburgher. I've known that guy probably since he was about 12. Just got a lot of respect and love for him as a human being, his commitment to the pursuit of his goals and dreams of doing what it is he's doing right now, which is playing in the NFL, and to watch him make personal decisions and make that a realization. It's just an honor to get to know young people like that. Had an opportunity to express that to him whenever I see him. We've played Buffalo each of the last 2 seasons, and he and I get to have a moment because it's just cool to not only appreciate these guys in terms of where they are now, but to know them since they were younger people, and to watch their maturation, their development, to watch them, earn what they've been chasing. It's just really a cool thing, and he's an example of that. I got a lot of love for that young man. We lifted him and that organization up in prayer. Reached out to Sean McDermott to lend whatever assistance I could. But I don't have a lot to add other than that. I just respect the fact that you guys appreciate how personal it is for me, not only for me, but just for all of us as people that thrive in this space. That's not obviously something that you ever want to see.
There is Mike Tomlin discussing
I love Mike Tomlin.
Damar Hamlin, yes. Coming up, we will dive into the further coverage of Bills, Bengals, and last night's injury. Before that, though, the outpouring of support from across the country, we've seen it across the NFL. Everyone has turned their Twitter avatar and social media avatar to Hamlin's number and his uniform as their avatar today. And all of the players and reaction in real time to the injury and what we were seeing. And then as other athletes from across the country wrapped up their games from the NHL to the NBA and beyond, we started to see more of support and thoughts and prayers with him there as well. Here is LeBron James after learning about this, after he wrapped up the Lakers game last night, and discussing the overall injuries that we are, or maybe in this case, not accustomed to seeing in sports.
Realize you just won a basketball game. I'm not sure if you saw what's happened in the, if you saw in the locker room what's happened with the NFL game. They have suspended the game while waiting the player's condition. I was wondering if you can comment on your thoughts on what happened. Is that the right call, obviously?
Well, obviously, I don't know, what happened. I seen the play, but I don't know exactly what happened. My thoughts and super prayers goes up to the skies above for that kid's family, for him. for that brotherhood of the NFL and everybody a part of the NFL family. It's definitely the right call by either whoever made that call, Roger Goodell, or whoever had an opportunity, the authority to make that call to suspend that. The safety of players in all sports is always the most important. So, it was a terrible thing to see, and I wish nothing but the best for that kid, for the city of Buffalo, for the franchise of the Bills, and like I said, for the rest of the NFL too as well, and also the Bengals that was there, and, playing in that game. So I'm a huge fan of the NFL. I'm a huge fan of football, and you never want to see anything like that happen, even in the type of competition that they're playing in.
And the contact aspect of all this, Chad, I don't know how you prevent that exact situation from happening, given the fact of his head's down, Higgins, but he hits with his shoulder. And as we'll hear, we've already heard from today, and we'll hear moving forward from other experts. The timing of this is what is so unique about this situation with Commotio Cordis. And I mean that is what is so stunning and alarming, is how many hits of that sort do players take on a routine basis. Not even in a game, but think about camp, as they train, and or celebration for that matter. And then what we saw last night with Damar Hamlin is just crushing.
Yeah, and talking to my buddy who's a cardiologist with Commotio Cordis, those hits, you're right, Hutton, so common in football and in other sports, quite frankly, in checks and hockey. I mean, you see it all the time. This is still such a rare situation. I do think it's important to put into that context. This isn't something bigger that, now we have to look at all of this all the time. My buddy, and I wrote it down, said it's basically the equivalent of getting struck by lightning at just the right time to die from a lightning strike. It's very, very unlikely for something like this to happen. It takes hard impact directly on the outside of the heart, right at the moment before the heart is about to beat. That can cause what they call a fatal rhythm to the heart, that basically it stops beating. And that's exactly what happened here when you look at the hit and when he was looking at it. This is something that, not to get too graphic for people, but studies were done by a researcher at Vanderbilt University in Nashville that I'm actually efforting to get on this show to talk about it. And the way they researched this was through pigs. They would have a baseball, the fast pitch machine, and they would actually fire baseballs at the outside of a pig's chest right as the moment happened to research the effect on humans.
And the impact.
And how an impact could stop someone's heart from the outside. And you had to time it up perfectly with right at the moment the heart was about to beat, which obviously was not easy to research, but that's how we learn more and more about Commotio Cordis, what it apparently looks like has happened here.
Yep, and we'll certainly keep efforts there with the cardiologist that came up with this trial and error to continue to research this. And as more information comes out, we will certainly provide that. John McClain will provide his opinion and analysis and reaction to everything on the field last night from Cincinnati. He's next on OutKick 360.
In the latest edition of the Trey Wallace podcast, I am Trey Wallace, happy to be joined by Saturday Down South national columnist, correspondent, you name it. He does everything. Connor O'Gara, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's nice to do a little home and home with you. Had you on the Saturday Down South podcast last week, be able to come on your show this week. I feel like there's like a million things that we can talk about as we get into bowl season. So yeah, man, I guess because I went in like 12 different directions with you, so it's only fitting that we probably do the same with me.
No, man, it happens. And we're getting into the crazy part of bowl season, kind of like, the mid-majors are out of the way. Now we're starting to get some of the bigger games that folks can get excited about towards the future. Starting on like Friday, and you get a nice matchup Friday night with Tennessee Clemson, a couple other matchups scattered, throughout the day, then getting into Saturday. If we're looking outside of Ohio State and Georgia and TCU, Michigan, Are there 2 or 3 games that stand out to you? They're like, okay, these have little implications towards maybe the 2023 season.
How about South Carolina, Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl? Really interested to see the way that this plays out for Spencer Rattler, somebody who has just had a season that I don't know if there's a recent comp to it where, man, after those first 10 games, everybody who was low on Spencer Rattler was like, see, this is why this was never going to work. What a horrible decision. South Carolina kind of wasted a year with all these great skill players, a lot of Marcus Satterfield hate. And now, just like that, after the 2 games that Spencer Rattler had, he's got a chance to do something very unique. And I wonder how that impacts his NFL draft status. I wonder if he is deciding based on how he performs in this game and the feedback that he gets, if he's coming back for another year. Shane Beamer would love to be able to move past sort of the awkwardness of these last few weeks with Marshawn Lloyd, Jaheim Bell entering the transfer portal. So I've got a lot of attention on that game. And then obviously against the Notre Dame team that's had a very herky-jerky year in itself for year one of the Marcus Freeman era. So looking forward to that. And then a game that I'm going to be at right after I come back from the Peach Bowl will be the ReliaQuest Bowl, which I still want to call the Outback Bowl because come on, let's
the Outback Bowl.
It's still the Outback Bowl. Like let's be real. But yeah, seeing the way that Zach Arnett responds to a very atypical situation. I think it was Ross Dellinger who said this is the first time that a sitting head coach has died while active since like Randy Walker 2006. I mean, This is very strange to see this set of circumstances. Fortunately for Zach Arnett, a few weeks to be able to prepare. We know that he had full autonomy on that side of the ball on defense. So you would hope that Mississippi State with a veteran quarterback in Will Rogers is going to be ready to go. I don't think they're losing that football game. I just don't. I'm kind of amazed that the spread is only Mississippi State -1, seeing as how Illinois is not going to be playing with Chase Brown, who's kind of the heart and soul of that offense. So I'm really looking forward to being able to see the way that Mississippi State responds. But yeah, there's intrigue. You want to get into Kentucky and Iowa, the rock fight that could happen there.
Are they going to get to 31 points? Like, that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. Well, they hit it.
How's that over under not in the 20s? It's going to be bad, but I'm looking forward to it. That's got the Sickos committee written all over it.
It's one of those games where, and I put it in a column that I had written this week. It's like, okay, what are you getting out of the offenses? You have no idea. Are you going to get something out of the Kentucky running game? Okay, well, that's going to be interesting and hard to find out.
OutKick 360 rolls on with John McClain. GallerySports.com is where you can read his great work. He's covered the NFL for really 5 decades, and he's joined us weekly for, going on 15 years or so.
It's been a long time.
And throughout that entire process, we've never had a discussion about like we're going to have an unprecedented situation given the circumstances and the protocol in place and the scene on the field last night in Cincinnati with Bills safety Damar Hamlin. John, hope you're well.
I'm doing great, guys. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. The rush of emotion is what we've been discussing throughout today's show in real time and trying to figure out What did we see? And then once you figure it out, you're like, man, this is a life or death situation. I'm assuming you're like us and like many who have never seen anything like this in the league before for those who have been covering it.
Well, in 1971, Lions receiver Chuck Hughes became the only player ever die on the field. He died of a heart attack going back to the huddle. That was in October 24th of 1971. And they didn't have today then what they have today. I think hopefully Hamlin will come back and be good and be able to lead a normal life. And then they'll get around to the first responders. Can you imagine the pressure they were under to have an NFL player who stopped breathing, his heart has stopped beating, no pulse, and they know they're on national TV. They got a sellout crowd. They got players gathered around from both teams. They're crying. They're holding hands. Everybody is just devastated, and they've got to save his life, and they did that. And I guarantee you, I expect those people to be, for all the people that worked to help him save his life, and hopefully his life will be saved. I'm guessing the NFL will honor them at the Super Bowl. They've done that before, but they deserve so much credit for what they did. I saw Gary Kubiak almost die at halftime of a game, and he had a TIA, which I forgot what it is now, but because I just thought of it.
It's like a mini stroke,
and
right?
A mini stroke. What it really was, they said it was a mini stroke. It was a stroke. And a story was done a couple of years ago. Shereen Williams on Pro Football Talk talking to Kubiak and the doctors, and they saved his life. And they put him on the ambulance and took him away. And I remember he was walking off the field and he collapsed. And I've seen players who got paralyzed and didn't play anymore, but I've never seen anybody in that situation where they had to shock his heart back into rhythm and get it beating again.
John, the outpouring of support and the best in people, Chad mentioned this to start the show, and I echo it. It's something we shouldn't forget about either, where you look at the foundation community, which is Hamlin's toy drive and the money raised going to this, with a goal of $2,500. It's now at $4.74 million. With athletes, celebrities, but also just the common fan and general decent human beings, Americans joining in on whatever they can donate to help support Hamlin in some way and have a connection to that. The show of support last night was something to behold.
And that number will keep going up. And when he's able to talk and understand what's going on and his family tells him about that, he's going to be astonished. And he'll be eternally grateful, of course. And he's had a foundation since he was in college. And I think we're finding out so much about him that we didn't know. And I think this outpouring from around the country, and I'm guessing around the world, because you think of all the fans they've got, say in Europe, they were asleep last night. They get up this morning and they see that, and they're trying to get as much information as they can, just like us. And there'll be a lot of donations from coming in from there if there's not already. Mexico, everywhere the NFL is played and is popular, I would imagine there's a lot of people who want to do something to help Damar Hamlin.
John, what you were watching just like we were. What was your takeaway from how the league handled operationally? Not first responders, great, obviously with all of that, but in terms of the game, were they going to play? Were they not going to play? With everything, the Troy Vincent, Joe Buck, ESPN back and forth now on what they were being told versus what Troy Vincent is claiming. I guess they just made up out of thin air about the 5-minute and then regroup and play. All of that put into this. What were your thoughts on all of it?
No, it wasn't made up after thin air. Buck talked to Andrew Marchand, the TV columnist for the New York Post today, and he told him John Perry, their officials expert, that he got it from somebody at the league office, and that's why he put it out. And Troy Vincent, who was on the 3-person conference call with Donna Ponte and Jeff Miller from the NFL office, said he didn't know where that came from, and he may legitimately not know. There's no way the NFL would have made them get out there and work for 5 minutes. It's just not the way the NFL operates. I saw somebody complaining that Goodell didn't have an answer questions. He's got a little bit more important things to worry about, because if you saw those pictures underneath the stadium, you saw McDermott and Zach Taylor, but Katie Blackburn, who's the daughter of my owner, Mike Brown of the Bengals, and runs that franchise, she was on the phone the whole time. And Troy Vincent's the one who was on the phone with Roger Goodell. And of course, they postponed it. They announced today it will not be played this week. You know, people are wondering, well, what are they going to do? Because if they declared a tie, that would hurt the Chiefs, and it would certainly help the Bills have a better chance to get home field advantage. But one of the things they could do, they have the bye week before the Super Bowl. You could move it. You could have play everything out this week. You could have them play on wild card weekend and move the wild card and the divisional and the championship games back a week. There were a lot of weeks in the Super Bowl era in which there was no bye week. Coaches and players don't like it anyway. But of course, I don't think they're going to announce anything until they hear more about Damar Hamlin's status. And from the cardiologists I've been reading today, they say this is a slow process. It's not like all of a sudden he's going to wake up and be fine. I mean, they had, what's really important is blood flow to the brain. And one of the things people talked about, and I think this made so much sense, when the ambulance was leaving the field, it waited on his mother to come out from the stands. If he were still in danger of dying right then, I think that ambulance would have left her and somebody else would have brought her. And so hopefully, I've read about a hockey player who got a puck in the chest and collapsed and came back. Soccer player, they administered to him for 70 minutes on the field, CPR, and he was able to come back. So hopefully, he'll be able to lead a normal life.
John, you raise a big-time predicament. Obviously, we're all thinking about Damar Hamlin, his safety first and foremost, but from a league operation standpoint, getting ready for the playoffs, this was not some throwaway game between two teams already eliminated on Monday Night Football. These are two teams vying for high spots in the playoffs. I don't know what you do. I think you brought up one possible solution. I don't know if that's obviously not going to be easy to pull off. I don't know what television contracts say. I don't know how they can move things around to add that extra week and then take away from that week between the championship games and the Super Bowl. And I keep coming back to, is the easiest solution the one that affects the least amount of teams? And that would be just to declare it a tie and say tough to the Chiefs or the Bills or the Bengals and all this. No one expected this to happen. It's a tragedy, and we're doing the best we can with it.
They could do that, and there's no way anybody could complain about it, or they could just do what they've done before. The NFL's moved things around. We saw it during the pandemic. That's one reason they have the bye week. Originally, that bye week was to promote it for the hype. They don't need that anymore. There have been a lot of Super Bowls played with no bye week before it. And coaches and players would rather do that anyway. The easiest thing would be to just declare it a tie. And that means Buffalo would end up, let's see, if Kansas City was 14-3 and Buffalo would win one more, they'd be 13-3-1. I can't even know what their records are. 12-3 right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Kansas City would win the last game against the Raiders at the Raiders and end up 14-3. And Buffalo, if it won its last game, I think against New England, they would be 13-3-1. So therefore, Kansas City would be have home field advantage in the bye week again.
What would happen if they declared a no contest?
What does that mean?
No
Same
result.
as a tie.
No result.
Well, a tie is the same thing.
Well, no, because a tie benefits certain teams better than others. A no contest would mean you just didn't play that game and you would go to the next tie-breaking scenario, which I believe is conference record.
Well, they could do that too. There'd be right now, if it was a no game, Buffalo's going to get home field advantage because Buffalo beat Kansas City.
Well, the latest statement that, and maybe something else has come out, John, right before you joined, was they're not going to resume this game this week, if at all.
Right.
That's the addendum
Right.
to that statement, if at all. And they're proceeding as of now without moving Week 18, which means the Bills and they're about to play the Patriots. That's the interesting part of it is Week 18 proceeds, and then with every other team being done, if they move the game back, it would just have that one game, you're saying, between Bills-Bengals.
That'd be some big ratings, wouldn't it? As it is right now, Kansas City, Buffalo, and Cincinnati with an outside chance to get that first bye and home field advantage in the playoffs. I think it would be if it was a no contest and Buffalo wins the last game, Buffalo is 13-3, and Kansas City would be 14-3, and that doesn't seem like that would be fair.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I searched last night looking for the no contest rules. It's very difficult to find. I couldn't find the tie-breaking scenarios with that included. But, like, for instance, if this would have happened, and we don't want it to happen, but if it did, at a certain point in the game in the second half, Goodell could call the game and declare a winner. That's within
like a baseball game after 5 innings?
Yeah. I mean, he could declare a team a winner based on the situation and not resume the game at all, given the circumstances. But the fact this happened in the first quarter really puts them in a spot where and it's also, I mean, you'll know this better than most, John. It's difficult to get the NFL and the NFLPA on the same page. And if it's not already in the bylaws, well, then you've got to go through the PA, which they're having to do last night on the decision about the game before Goodell officially announced it. That's why the statements came out at virtually the same second on social media. And on top of that, inform the teams, inform stadiums. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts with all of it.
If they declared it a no contest or if they declared it a tie, I don't know how anybody complained, including the fans that were affected or the players who were affected, because this is an unprecedented situation.
John, as far as the player interaction at midfield, that was something else. You know, we saw the Diggs and others that just are crying over there. They're sitting there watching this. You've also got you've got the quarterbacks, Allen and Burrow, who are embracing there. I think that's the other part of it is both teams shared the same sentiment, and both coaches as well.
I think that we're going to see some awards by photographers coming from this game. That scene where the Bills players were all circled like a donut, and they were all on one knee, and they all had their head down praying. That was a powerful picture.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that winning. Yes, that one. I could see that maybe winning a Pulitzer because of what it stands for, which is an unprecedented situation in the NFL. And but I think that's the thing. I thought ESPN handled it as well as they could have handled it. You know, you've got reporters who are not trained to do that, and all of a sudden they throw it to you. And Susie Colbert and Booger McFarland and Adam Schefter, they saw what we saw on a TV. They weren't getting information. I thought they did as well as could have been expected. And then they go to Scott Van Pelt, and he was outstanding. Ryan Clark was outstanding. I thought just overall those guys did a tremendous job under unprecedented circumstances.
And, John, think about the personnel there in that stadium that have seen over the last several years and just this season alone, the Ryan Shazier injury, Tua Tagovailoa, where, you know, on Thursday Night Football, he's knocked out, he's knocked unconscious, and then last night in real time, all of that playing out, and the personnel from the same stadium, virtually the same. Some of them may rotate based on the day and time of their schedule. That's also the unprecedented part is how much they've seen in a very short amount of time.
Damar Hamlin was dead. You know, his heart had stopped. There was no pulse. They brought him back to life. They've saved his life. Hopefully, he'll be able to lead a normal life. And all those situations we're talking about, Shazier and other players who've been paralyzed, they never thought right then at that moment they were going to die. But in this one, that's why everybody was so mesmerized by it, because we couldn't remember it. I don't remember 1971 when Chuck Hughes died on the field. I remember reading about it, but it wasn't, Monday Night Football was in its second year. If that had been on Monday Night Football, of course it would have been big, but it wouldn't have been like today where you can get the NFL in so many places. And I know this, when that kid comes back, Hamlin, he's going to have so much to be thankful for, and he's going to want to thank so many people. It may take him an whole off season to do that.
John, I can't think of a moment that even approaches this in terms of every fan of an NFL team. When their team is eliminated, they will be all in on the Buffalo Bills winning the Super Bowl. I think that was the case before this happened. The only comparison I can make is 2001 Patriots after 9/11 with all the symbolism of the Patriots logo, the red, white, and blue, and Tom Brady's first run through the playoffs, beating the Rams. I think this is going to be even bigger because of that losing Super Bowl history of the Buffalo Bills trying to get over the hump. Now combined with this tragic scene, the Bills may actually be America's team right now. Do you agree or disagree?
I think that's a great observation, Chad. Like they are America's team. Cowboy fans wouldn't like to hear it, but the fact is, who doesn't like Buffalo? Their fans are great. It's a class organization. You don't hear any bad things coming out. Sean McDermott is respected as a head coach. Brandon Beane, very respected general managers. Pagulas are respected. And man, they're the Bills Mafia. The Bills Mafia is something else. I've been there a million times, and I love going there, and I love the fans. And I think you're right. When your team is eliminated, most of the fans are going to pull for the Bills. Can you imagine what the Super Bowl would be like if they're there, and if Damar Hamlin is okay and he can come out there and be introduced on the sideline with his teammates? That would just be one of the most heart-clutching, heart-grabbing situations I've ever seen in any professional sport, not just football.
John McClain, gallerysports.com is where you can read his work. You can also follow him on social like we do, at McClain_on_NFL. John, thank you as always for the perspective each week, especially today with everything that took place last night.
Jonathan and Chadillac, thank you guys very much as always. Happy New Year. I look forward to talking to you next week, and good luck to the Titans.
Yes, thank you, John.
Missed you last week, John.
Happy New
Good
Year.
seeing you. Happy New Year.
There he is, John McClain.
I miss those Chadillacs. I got to get a couple doses of Chadillac in every single week, or I just don't feel right. It's like a vitamin C. Getting John to say Chadillac to me is like a multivitamin.
Like a boost.
A shot of energy.
That's right.
It's an espresso.
Hit us up on social at OutKick 360. We had some other headlines coming up. A bit later, we have Jay Skurski, the Buffalo news writer who covers the Buffalo Bills. He'll join us to give perspective on Buffalo and the Bills roster, the team, the outshowing of support, and the outpouring of good vibes that everyone is sending that team's way, and especially Damar Hamlin.
We got to talk about Bart Scott and Skip Bayless.
Yeah.
And the trouble they're in, or maybe not. I don't know. Bart Scott taking a lot of heat from the league right now and from players for something he said that we're going to get into also.
ESPN is trying to avoid speculation, which they said in the statement, and Bart Scott was not. That's next on OutKick 360.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys, because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well, with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say, more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam, so that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had to actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But, they just, I don't know, they just were different folks. And it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because, again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy's literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like, if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for a while. So you're trying to make do of it, and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. Granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around. And everything else, at a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
OutKick 360 rolls on. You know, there's always a jump to conclusions, especially on social media, as people are reacting in real time. And then you have those that are in our line of work that, for whatever reason, don't mind speculating on things and throwing things out there. And we certainly saw plenty of that last night, not just the two we're going to feature, but across, there were several like local reporters and others that were being retweeted for what they were saying about, resume the game. You certainly can't do that in that setting. You don't know. I mean, we didn't know if he was alive. You know, there was so much speculation going on that I prefer the league take their time and assess every detail before releasing any type of statement.
Yeah, there are just times where, say less.
Yeah.
You don't need to take to social media with every passing thought in your precious brain. At all times. Not everyone cares, and you don't need to say everything you're thinking at all times. And last night was a time to just say, boy, this is horrific, hate it, prayers up, whatever you want to say, but to speculate on what the league should do or it just wasn't, to me, was not the time to do that. Skip Bayless is in a bit of hot water. What he tweeted I didn't think was so egregious. It was the timing when he says, no doubt the NFL is considering postponing the rest of this game, but how? This late in the season, a game of this magnitude is crucial to the regular season outcome, which suddenly seems so irrelevant. Hutton, you pointed out that if you start with the outcome of this game is irrelevant, and then ask the question of how you do it, I don't think he's in as much hot water.
Well, and I'm sure you received the same thing I was receiving from friend. I know there are others that got this too. Hey, what's going to happen now? How are we going to proceed with the league schedule? To this point, the league still hasn't told us. But there's plenty of speculation out there as to what's going to be said or done in that regard. But that is a discussion topic. There's just a point in place and time for that. And, Bayless doing it when he did in the middle of the really confusion about what we saw live, what the replay then showed, and then how it was being handled, where this was right after, correct me if I'm wrong, I saw this sitting watching this game, right after we had reports that they actually administer CPR on Damar Hamlin. Now, at the end of that, he's right. Bayless is right. All of that, of what he said, is irrelevant. But if it's irrelevant, I don't know why you tweet it then.
There's no reason to say it. I mean, the game is so secondary at that point. I mean, we all had, again, you don't have to put it out publicly. We all had the thought. I'm sitting there watching thinking, man, this is such an easy decision to go ahead and call the game if it's, Texans and the Commanders right now, and they're both eliminated from the playoffs or whoever it may be. But this is a game for first place implications in the AFC, so it's a game of meaning. Not that the game has any more meaning, obviously, than Damar Hamlin. Again, good lesson. Just don't tweet everything you're thinking at all times. You won't get in as much trouble. And for Bart Scott to go on ESPN today and say that offensive players can't use the crown of their helmet as a weapon, which is kind of what T. Higgins did. And he says, I'm not trying to put the blame on T. Higgins, but that's something they tried to take out of the league. And then he goes into explaining, what happened on the hit. It was a very unremarkable football play. There was nothing out of the ordinary about that play. It was a ball carrier trying to get a few extra yards, who's running one way and then just goes upfield and tucks it and runs hard into a tackler who brings them down. To even insinuate that it was an illegal play by T. Higgins, which, by the way, it wasn't. He didn't lead with his helmet. He hit him with his shoulder, is just ridiculous at this point of Bart Scott to say. And he's taking some fire from some players across the league also.
Well, I mean, you're lowering your helmet to the offensive player there, and Higgins is bracing for impact. And you're right. The play itself and the contact there is a very, I mean, we're normalized to that hit in football, right? That goes without saying. And for Bart Scott, who has
played a lot of football
and played a lot of physical, in an era of physical football, where you did lower your helmet and you delivered some big hits. I don't know why he's turning this on Higgins, saying that this was an illegal deal where he ducks his helmet. Insinuation there, and I know he clarified it, but when you say that out, it's like, what point of that football play does that now institute a penalty for the offense when the defender is coming up to make that hit. And it's a very uninformed opinion in real time that involves speculation, which ESPN put out in a statement in regards to why they said the teams were going to warm up for 5 minutes, that they weren't going to do.
Here's what makes me kind of chuckle at that, though, is what Bart Scott said is what I would expect Skip Bayless to say.
Yeah.
Something that someone who never played in the NFL and didn't really play football would say something that uninformed and not understand the psyche of a football player. On ESPN, when they go to Booger McFarland and Ryan Clark, those guys are in tears trying to talk about it, seeing that, having played the game at the highest level the way they did. Really, really uninformed from Bart Scott to not have the empathy to put himself in the place of T. Higgins and think, by the grace of God, that wasn't me if I hit someone and that happened, and how bad I would feel. I thought it was incredibly insensitive and just dumb of a guy who played that much in the NFL.
The reaction to what he said, too, from players, also what we would see from reaction to Skip Bayless.
I feel bad for T. Higgins and all this, too, being a part of it.
Jay Skurski joins us next from the Buffalo News with perspective on the Bills. That's next.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking that we're going to be practicing the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all of this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude. The Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point it felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Glad you're with us as we kick off hour number 3 of OutKick 360. With Chad Withrow, I'm Jonathan Hutton. We've been discussing and reacting to the horrific scene last night with Bills safety Damar Hamlin, who remains in critical condition in the intensive care unit at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. And we're trying to get perspective from different angles throughout the day. I'm pleased to be joined by Bills beat writer for the Buffalo News, Jay Skurski, who joins us via Zoom. Jay, thank you for the time, man. And first and foremost, is there any more to add to that update that we've already seen earlier in the day?
No, that is it right now. That was from the Bills this afternoon. We have received a statement from Damar Hamlin's family, basically asking for continued prayers for Damar. We've, as you mentioned there, received that statement from the Bills saying that he remains in critical condition in intensive care. So I know everyone is very anxious to hear more about his condition and to hopefully hear good news about his improvements. But as of right now, the updates have been fairly slow to come in since he left the game last night.
Yeah, and we're all concerned about Damar Hamlin, the human. But, Jay, what can you tell us about Damar Hamlin, the teammate, the football player for the Buffalo Bills? I know in a tough spot already filling in for Micah Hyde with his injury. But
correct.
What is he like in the locker room and with that team?
Yeah, so, he's a young guy, as you mentioned there. He's filling in for Micah Hyde. He didn't become a starter until Micah Hyde was lost for the season because of a neck injury early in the year. He does have a good amount of experience, though, now. Micah Hyde went out early in the year, and Damar Hamlin has been the every down or every week starter since he was hurt. So he's a former 6th-round draft pick out of Pitt last year. Came in, he primarily played a special teams role, in that reserve safety role. I will tell you, his teammates love him. I actually talked to Micah Hyde last week. Micah Hyde has stayed around the Bills, even though he's rehabbing his injury, about Damar Hamlin. And it just so happened that we had that conversation at Micah Hyde's locker, and he raved about the improvements that he's seen from him, both on the field on Sundays or Mondays, but also in practice and his practice habits, the way he watches film, the way that he's continuing to develop within this defense. And this is a promising young player who at 24 years old is in the absolute prime of his condition, the prime of his physical health. And I think part of that, part of what has made this so shocking is how could something like this happen to a world-class athlete who is in the best shape of his life? I think that's another reason that it's just been so scary.
We had John McClain on, and he talked about, one possibility he floated was, since the league has come out and said Week 18 will happen as planned, you could push everything back into that week where there's the week off between championship weekend and the Super Bowl, and play Bengals in that one weekend and push everything back a week. That's obviously secondary to his health, but you got a lot of Bills fans and Bills Mafia that are concerned with the football side of this also, that I'm sure have their opinions on what to do with this game now that it's been postponed. Can you sense any consensus with what fans want to see with this game? And do you have any idea what's the most likely scenario for the NFL and how to proceed?
Yeah, I really do not have a consensus. I've been traveling a lot of today, left, Cincinnati early this morning to come back to Buffalo. And it's honestly the overwhelming sense that I get from this team, from this fan base right now, is just concern for Damar Hamlin. I don't feel like they're really worried about the outcome of this game, quite frankly. I saw a lot last night and then early this morning about just give the Bills the forfeit. They don't even want to worry about the game. And I know going in, there was so much at stake with this game in terms of the number 1 seed in the AFC and how things could play out in the conference. But when you say that it's become secondary, I mean, it has become a distant secondary right now. There has been really not a lot of talk at all amongst the fan base. And I really can't even imagine inside the facility about what's going to happen with this game. I truly think that it is kind of up in the air right now. One thing that we should consider here is, and I know it's unlikely, but if the Chiefs and the Bengals were to lose and the Bills were to win in Week 18, then that game between Cincinnati and Buffalo becomes meaningless because the Bills would still have the number 1 seed. Now, obviously, again, that's unlikely given the strength of the Chiefs and the Bengals. So I could see a scenario here where the NFL takes this through through week 18 and then decides, do we need to finish this game between the Bengals and the Bills? And if we do, what's the best way to do that?
Jay Skurski joins us from the Buffalo News. He covers the Buffalo Bills there. What you mentioned there is really interesting because, we're discussing resuming this game and when. That's the next storyline that we're waiting on because the league said if at all, if they're going to play it at all. But they are playing Week 18 right now as scheduled, and that includes Bills-Patriots. What do you make of the team now that has to regroup? And I know the Bills aren't making anyone available today, and that's leading to I wonder the discussions that are going on behind the scenes between the league and the team.
Yeah, and that's a great point because here we are already Tuesday evening. Wednesday ahead of a Sunday game is usually the first week of practice or the first day of the practice week. It's typically the day that is the busiest in terms of media coverage. Is this team going to be in a position, number one, to practice? Forget about talking to the media. And then if they do practice, are they going to talk to the media? Are they going to have any sort of updates? Maybe not just on Damar Hamlin's condition. I'm sure that those will come out as there are updates as they are warranted. But are we going to hear from Sean McDermott, Josh Allen, the leaders on this team about what this last 48 hours has been like for them? Just how have they dealt with the anguish? And anguish is the right word. When you saw their reactions on the field on Monday night, how are they processing all of that? And how are they trying to get ready to play another game here just on Sunday, which feels like it's just right around the corner? So again, a lot more, I think, unanswered questions right now than answers, unfortunately. And that starts with, what is their plan for Week 18, and how are they possibly going to get ready to play another football game so soon?
Yeah, exactly. Jay Skurski, our guest, and I know you echo the sentiment of many of our guests and us. So this is the most horrifying thing you've ever seen from, the football standpoint. And in many cases, no one's seen, the CPR administered live in person. I also read what you said, Jay, about, you had the binoculars, but there were so many medical personnel. It was obstructed view even from the press box with binoculars to cover what was going on in real time. Based on the protocol of the stadium, which I know has changed over the last couple of years across the country, were you able to go down in the tunnel? Like, could you observe players there outside the locker room and the scene that we were all watching live on ESPN?
So we had 3 reporters at the game. So I personally stayed in the press box to write, while another of our reporters did go down into the tunnel. When she arrived, that was right around the time that the tunnel was being emptied out. There was a very clear desire amongst the NFL personnel, maybe Bills and Bengals personnel, to keep that area clear of all media. So the media that was in the tunnel at that time outside the Bills locker room was instructed to either return to the press box or to go out to the field. Even last night when the Bills flew home, it is very typical. You've probably seen it before. When fans meet the team at the airport, it happens a lot after big wins. There were fans that went over, obviously, that wanted to show their support for the team. They were kept a good deal of distance away from the airport. There was a heavy police presence there. So it was very clear throughout last night, from the time that Damar Hamlin left the field in an ambulance, that the NFL, the Bills, the Bengals wanted to keep this as private as they possibly could. And that meant for the, and I'm not saying that they restricted the media or did anything wrong, but they certainly controlled where the media was able to go in those situations.
Just outsider looking into the situation and what the ESPN cameras showed us, I thought it was a remarkable show of leadership from Sean McDermott throughout the whole process. Just very even-keeled, but you could tell he was emotional in his handling with Zach Taylor, with the lead official, with everything going on. Jay, I'm sure that doesn't surprise you, covering this team and covering the guy. What did you make of what you saw from Sean McDermott during last night?
You're right. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think that Sean McDermott has proven, during his time with the Bills, that he knows how to lead a football team. He has, I think, demonstrated that time and again. I will tell you, too, that I think that the Bengals organization, and that's led by Zach Taylor, all the way down, their medical personnel, the statement that their team president put out today. I think they have handled this as well as a team that didn't have the player who suffered the medical incident can possibly handle it. So I think they deserve a lot of credit here too. But yes, you're absolutely right. Sean McDermott has taught, and listen, this has been a trying football season for the Buffalo Bills. When you consider what has happened in our community back in May, when there was a mass shooting, and in the way that the team sort of rallied around that and tried to uplift the community in their own way at that point. We have been through 2 horrific snowstorms here, including a blizzard on Christmas Eve that has taken the lives of more than 40 people here. It has been 2022 and now here into the first few days of 2023 have been a very difficult time for this city. And I know that Sean McDermott feels that. I know that this team feels that. And the head coach is fiercely proud of leading Buffalo, of being a part of the fabric of Western New York. And if you know anything about the Bills, the sense of community around this team that starts with the fan base and trickles down into the organization is very, very strong. And that continues in that locker room. And the head coach, I think, plays a really big part in that. And this is a team that when you talk about brotherhood and you talk about loving one another in that locker room, sometimes that feels overblown or that just feels like maybe some hyperbole. It's not in this case. That is truly how these guys feel about each other. I think a big part of that is their head coach. And listen, this is going to be the biggest challenge that Sean McDermott has ever faced as a coach. I'm very comfortable in saying that.
Jay, I don't think I'm unlike a lot of people. When I watch a sporting event, I have a hard time not picking a side and just rooting. Even if I don't go into it thinking I'm going to root for one team over the other, I end up rooting for one team over the other. The Bills have sort of been that team for me in the last couple of years, given the hard luck of their fan base and how loyal that fan base has remained. I don't think I'm overstating this. I don't know a single American that's not going to be watching the Bills unless you're an AFC East fan of a rival team that's going to be watching that game with their team not involved and not pulling for Buffalo. Can you sense sort of a growing bandwagon possibly with this group of Buffalo Bills, especially now, considering this tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me after seeing what this team has gone through last night. I mean, this is a situation that is literally unprecedented in the NFL. There has never been a suspended game because of a medical issue of this nature. And then to not have the game finished. I mean, we get, and it sounds bad, right? But we get accustomed to seeing these injuries, sometimes terrible injuries. It happens almost every week. And what happens? The players, they take a knee, they say a quick prayer, and then the game continues. This was different. This was something else entirely. And the look on those players' faces told you that immediately. And I'm thinking especially of the people that were in that stadium. And I'm not thinking as much, and I should be, about all of those people who are watching this unfold at home and the horrors that they were experiencing, not just in Buffalo, but listen, this was a nationally broadcast game, a huge game in the AFC. I am sure that the audience was massive for this game. And that there is a lot there, right, for people who saw this, the casual football fans who saw the brutality of this sport in such a way. And I understand exactly what you're saying when you say that, I feel like some of those people who maybe didn't have a rooting interest in the Bills are going to come away from this saying, boy, if there's one team that you'd like to see have, maybe to see some success or to see have better days ahead, it would be the Bills right now.
And that falls in line with the outpouring of support with not just the Hamlin family and directly with Damar, but what we've seen from the foundation that he has that supports the toy drive. That was a $2,500 goal and a GoFundMe. Now it's at $4.84 million. And, we mentioned to start the show, Jay, Bills Mafia has been a part of plenty of donations for other fan groups, players that are struggling or trying to boost their certain foundation. And now we're seeing the rest of the NFL community and beyond, greatly beyond, donating to this cause and somehow trying to connect with the Hamlin family in any way possible.
Yeah, right. You're exactly right. And I think it's just such a cool thing that has started in this community. It was so organic. It dates back to actually, oddly enough, a game against the Cincinnati or involving the Cincinnati Bengals, I should say, when the Bengals beat the Baltimore Ravens. That win helped the Bills get into the playoffs and break their postseason drought. And the donations went at that time to Andy Dalton's foundation, and that sort of started this ball rolling. Now, where you mentioned that when things like this happen, we saw it earlier this year when Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa was hurt against the Bills, and donations went to his charity. So it does not surprise me at all that Bills fans are supporting Damar Hamlin and his foundation in the way that they are, and to see now how the NFL community as a whole. I think I saw just before we joined that Tom Brady, George Kittle, some of the biggest stars in this league are now contributing to that as well. I think it's just a way for fans, for those involved in the NFL, whether they're players or coaches or front offices or teams, to show some sort of support, to let the Hamlin family know that they're not alone in this, and that they are thinking about Damar. And if they're, you just hope that some good can come from all of these donations. I'm sure it's going to help his community back in Pittsburgh, which he has been so dedicated to giving back to. And I saw a tweet, it was from a local radio broadcast personality here before I came on. And it was, I really need Damar to wake up soon so that he can see all of these donations and how they've come in. And I just thought that was really touching. I think he is going to be incredibly surprised and happily surprised when he is able to find out what the NFL community and what the Western New York community and really nationwide, what football fans have done for him to try to support him and his family at this time.
Very well said. Jay Skurski has been our guest from the Buffalo News, covers the Bills there. Final thing, how difficult has it been to not, we're doing this right now. We're not speculating. That's the goal, I believe, for most of the sports media and the community right now, to not try to advance the story as you sit here and wait for the next statement or update, especially like last night in the press box where I'm assuming everyone was waiting for the next update, just like everyone watching at home, because unlike a typical injury, this happened at midfield. And there's no sideline reporter giving direct, injury updates or an injury status from the team. And it's difficult to actually find people that have the information needed to report on it accurately.
I think it's very difficult. I think, you certainly have a job to do, right? We have a job to do. It is unheard of. It's unprecedented that the job turned in the way that it did last night. I tweeted this at the end. I got back to my hotel sometime after 3:00 last night and finally had a minute to breathe and to think about what I had seen. And, basically, as I expressed on social media, what I wanted to do in those moments, as I was tweeting what I was seeing, was just that, was to give fans and maybe those who weren't inside the stadium and maybe things that weren't being picked up on the broadcast at times, what I was seeing. And in a story like this, being first is not the most important thing. That you as a reporter, you strive for that, right? You want to break the story. This is not a story that you want to break. This is a story that demands that you have it right. And that means allowing the official channels to communicate to us, right? That being whether that be the NFL, whether that be the Buffalo Bills, whether that be maybe a representative from the hospital, or we hear from, say, Damar Hamlin's agency. We hear from Damar Hamlin's family directly. I don't think that this is where you want to go fishing for something. You want to make sure that you have every detail in this story right, and that you report it with the proper level of, I would say, grace that's required in this, because it is such a serious, heartbreaking issue in so many ways. So it's vital that you stay right on the topic and just report what is happening and what you know to be true. That is just so important in a story like this.
No doubt. And that sentiment is why we wanted Jay Skurski on our show today to give perspective there. Jay, thank you, man. This has been excellent, just from your vantage point and what you saw last night and the outpouring of support from the community at large. And we'll be following you on social. You just search him out at Jay Skurski, and we'll be waiting on the very latest from the NFL and from anyone with the Bills there.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on and allowing me to talk through this with you guys.
Yeah, man. Thank you. There's Jay Skurski, Buffalo News, and great Bills coverage there from Jay, as usual, in an unprecedented situation.
It's good perspective from him.
No doubt. Coming up, some other headlines of the day, including the NCAA and the NCAA committee recommending expanding, wait for it, the NCAA tournament yet again. And the number of teams involved, well, it's more than 68. That's next on OutKick 360.
In the latest edition of the Trey Wallace podcast, I am Trey Wallace, happy to be joined by Saturday Down South national columnist, correspondent, you name it. He does everything. Connor O'Gara, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's nice to do a little home and home with you. Had you on the Saturday Down South podcast last week, be able to come on your show this week. I feel like there's like a million things that we can talk about as we get into bowl season. So yeah, man, I guess because I went in like 12 different directions with you. So it's only fitting that we probably do the same with me.
No, man, it happens. And we're getting into the crazy part of bowl season, kind of like, the mid-majors are out of the way. Now we're starting to get some of the bigger games that folks can get excited about towards the future, starting on like Friday. And you get a nice matchup Friday night with Tennessee, Clemson, a couple other matchups scattered, throughout the day, then getting into Saturday. If we're looking outside of Ohio State and Georgia and TCU, Michigan, are there 2 or 3 games that stand out to you? They're like, okay, these have little implications towards maybe the 2023 season.
How about South Carolina, Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl? Really interested to see the way that this plays out for Spencer Rattler, somebody who has just had a season that I don't know if there's a recent comp to it where, man, after those first 10 games, everybody who was low on Spencer Rattler was like, see, this is why this was never going to work. What a horrible decision. South Carolina kind of wasted a year with all these great skill players, a lot of Marcus Satterfield hate. And now, just like that, after the 2 games that Spencer Rattler had, he's got a chance to do something very unique. And I wonder how that impacts his NFL draft status. I wonder if he is deciding based on how he performs in this game and the feedback that he gets, if he's coming back for another year. Shane Beamer would love to be able to move past sort of the awkwardness of these last few weeks with Marshawn Lloyd, Jaheim Bell entering the transfer portal. So I've got a lot of attention on that game. And then obviously against the Notre Dame team that's had a very herky-jerky year in itself for year one of the Marcus Freeman era. So looking forward to that. And then a game that I'm going to be at right after I come back from the Peach Bowl will be the ReliaQuest Bowl, which I still want to call the Outback Bowl because come on, let's
the Outback Bowl.
It's still the Outback Bowl. Like let's be real. But yeah, seeing the way that Zach Arnett responds to a very atypical situation. I think it was Ross Dellinger who said this is the first time that a sitting head coach has died while active since like Randy Walker 2006. I mean, This is very strange to see this set of circumstances. Fortunately for Zach Arnett, a few weeks to be able to prepare. We know that he had full autonomy on that side of the ball on defense. So you would hope that Mississippi State with a veteran quarterback in Will Rogers is going to be ready to go. I don't think they're losing that football game. I just don't. I'm kind of amazed that the spread is only Mississippi State -1, seeing as how Illinois is not going to be playing with Chase Brown, who's kind of the heart and soul of that offense. So I'm really looking forward to being able to see the way that Mississippi State responds. But yeah, there's intrigue. You want to get into Kentucky and Iowa, the rock fight that could happen there.
Are they going to get the 31 points? Like, that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. Well, they hit it.
How's that, dude? How's that over under not in the 20s? It's going to be bad, but I'm looking forward to it. That's got the Sickos committee written all over it.
It's one of those games where, and I put it in a column that I had written this week. It's like, okay, what are you getting out of the offenses? You have no idea. Are you going to get something out of the Kentucky running game? Okay, well, that's going to be interesting and hard to find out.
OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick network.
We're back.
We'll get further reaction and we'll give some more analysis to what we saw and the latest with Damar Hamlin in just a moment. But no update officially yet. If it happens, we'll make sure we will be covering that over the final 35-plus minutes of the show. The NCAA committee that is tasked with making sure that they modernize where they're headed. This is a committee that is co-chaired by SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. They have recommended that the NCAA tournament and all postseason tournaments expand. Again, this is the Transformation Committee is what they call it. Expand to include at least 25% of active Division I members in good standing in team sports sponsored by more than 200 schools. So if you have more than 200 schools playing for your championship effectively in any given calendar year, they want it to include 25% of those participating schools. And that would, in essence, boost the NCAA tournament from 68 teams up to around 90, according to the NCAA committee for transformation in college sports. This will now go before the actual board that can vote this into existence, and that takes place next week in San Antonio. The further expansion, the initial reaction, Chad, and I'm sure you thought the same thing I was. This is further money grab for what is a $1 billion+ tournament already for the NCAA. And they're going, I think the line of thinking here is they are going to include certain, not restrictions, guidelines in order to qualify for the 25%. And part of that is at least 2 years of medical coverage after college or completion of their athletic career if they sustain an athletic injury. That's going to be the requirement for all Division I participants. Mental health treatment and services in accordance with recognized best practices, degree completion funds for 10 years should they choose to step away from their studies before reaching graduation, before eventually deciding to return. There are other aspects to this.
It's not just the expansion of the tournament.
But I think what it is, if they're going to require this, what they're going to pitch is, well, we need more teams to participate in order to help fund this, because the teams that we have now, if we get to 25%, that's going to help more programs fund what we're suggesting needs to improve across college sports for transformation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the pitch. But we know why they're starting the headlines with the NCAA tournament. That is their golden goose.
Because that is their moneymaker. And look, if this is truly a situation where they're not just taking all the profit of what 22 more teams would do for them in the NCAA tournament.
18 or 19% of the current number that's represented in the tournament.
So if it's not just a cash grab to take it as profit, and it's actually going back to the schools and the programs and the athletic departments to do some good things, I'm for it. I'm torn because I'm never one that's in favor of less of a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, when the playoffs in the NFL expanded, I wasn't thinking, man, this really waters down the product. I'm thinking, hell, I love NFL playoffs. Let's have more games. Great. All for it. So I love the NCAA tournament. So when I hear 90 teams, I don't get upset about it. I don't think, man, that's going to really ruin the tournament or anything like that. But then on the flip side of it, I think, it took Northwestern basketball like 65 years to get to a tournament. And now they might go every year in this new format or every other year. And what does that mean for basketball programs? Here's the other thing too, Hutton. Is this going to be simply a way to backdoor the bottom third of Power 5 conference teams into the tournament? Or are they going to start taking more at-large bids from mid-majors? Because that's going to be the big debate.
Sure.
Because most of the high major teams, the Power 5 teams, are better, and they will naturally play tougher schedules than some of the other teams. And then it's just, you're still playing it where it's almost, I'm going to take my ball and go home. If you're the Power 5 school, you're going to get the better spot in the tournament, and you're going to get more of those spots.
There's certainly the haves and the have-nots, right? We've detailed that with conference expansion over the summer. But the athletic benefits for the student athlete, as they're framing it here, I think it's interesting to your point because the bottom third of the Power Five, I believe, can afford to make sure. I mean, the bottom third of the Power Five, in some cases, are getting $100 million per season moving forward for their entire athletic department, based on the television contracts just for football. But this bullet point: require all Division I schools to provide medical coverage for athletically related injuries for a minimum of 2 years following graduation, or the completion of participation. The recommendation says that a national coverage model might be needed to help some programs cover costs. Well, you could fund that through this expanded tournament. You could fund it now, quite frankly, through a $1 billion tournament that exists. But I wonder how much of this is going to be on the school versus getting some help through this national coverage that they're pointing out. That detail is not out there, but that's the first bullet point in a list of things. And if it is a have and have not issue, well, more than likely for these teams that are in good standing, that are providing this requirement, if voted through, it's not official, if voted through, are probably your Power 5 schools, more so than those that are struggling to make ends meet, trying to schedule Power 5 schools in order to get the payday to fund their athletic department, right? Like,
yeah,
that's all part of this, and that all goes through football, not hoops. But the NCAA is making the vast majority of their budget off of this tournament.
Yeah, and how do you structure it? Is it just as simple as you have a similar format, just more teams, or is there more of a play-in bracket? Is there?
Well, I think you got to go on campus. The first round already.
I think you almost have to host games, NIT type format. But for those early games,
I think you're in
the
tournament.
You get the benefit of hosting a game.
I think you have to, because the attendance right now for the first and second round is already awful. Dockich was in talking about it. He's like, no one is attending these games right now in the first round, and he's like, he's comparing that to a bowl game right now. The casual bowl game in mid-December.
If it's not Kentucky,
right,
who's going to travel to half the Commonwealth to their game, they're not getting much attendance.
Yeah, but I mean, he's right, and therefore I want to see this back on campus. That's what I'm so excited about with the college football playoff expansion, is that first round is on campus. I think this would certainly help that out, and maybe you can have a host campus, right? You can have 4 teams there and do something instead of having everyone go to Pittsburgh from, Wichita.
Look, it should guarantee you a packed house if you're going to host a first round or second round NCAA tournament game with you being the higher seed in a host school. I'll also say there is a value in that whole experience, the way it's been done for years, of you go to a host site, you're going to a different city, you're typically playing in an NBA arena or an NHL arena somewhere, and it's a unique, and I've covered a number of tournaments, it's a very unique setup where you get all those teams there, a lot from different regions that are there as well. It's pretty cool to have that experience, but I mean, hosting an NCAA tournament game would also be very cool.
Yeah, and you can earn the right to get to that experience. Make it out of the expanded first weekend, right?
Yeah.
But it's man, I'm not clamoring for 90 plus teams, around 90 to get in. And we're just discussing the men's tournament. This 25% recommendation is also for the women's tournament, right? Like this goes beyond hoops.
It's not going to, with all due respect to the women's tournament, that's not going to move the needle one way or the other.
But all sports that they're referencing,
and I say that because I think the first rounds of the women's tournament, it gets more interest as it gets closer to the Final Four. Yeah. But the first round doesn't matter anyway. So if you add 22 teams, I don't think it's going to have a big impact.
And those are already on campus.
That first Thursday and Friday of the men's NCAA tournament is a national sports holiday.
Don't mess with the 11 a.m. Central tip-off.
It is the biggest and best, in my opinion, my humble opinion, single tournament in the United States. And I put that over the Masters. I put that over a lot of other things. In terms of one sporting event, if you combine everything with the NCAA men's basketball tournament, it's the best. And that Thursday and Friday, that's a rite of spring for people to play sick from work and go and watch brackets and fill out a bracket. It's a big deal for fans of the men's tournament, and there's a lot more fans of the men's tournament than the women's tournament. I don't think it matters in the least bit if you add 22 women's teams to their bracket early on, because people aren't really paying attention until the very end, and then a lot of people aren't paying attention then either.
Yes. And Greg Sankey and others involved with this committee According to the 39-page report that was released, it says that they're going to be made available to the media on Tuesday. I haven't seen the official Q&A if that did happen on a conference call. I've only seen statements made from those with this. So we'll see where this heads. But it's a discussion point moving forward for the NCAA that has really no control over the college football playoff. You know, that's its own separate entity, and this is the recommendation coming from Sankey, who certainly has a lot of say over the college football playoff, as do the Power Five, on how to keep the other programs, the other sports moving in the right direction for the future and how to fund that. Hit us up with your thoughts at OutKick 360. You can join us in the chat as well. No update other than what we received this morning and early afternoon from the NFL or from the Hamlin family, where Damar Hamlin remains in critical condition. Last we have been alerted and told, just like you, after suffering cardiac arrest yesterday evening on the field in the first quarter in Cincinnati. The Bills' safety remains in critical condition, and the family released a statement thanking everyone for their support and donations and prayers and their show of, I think Jay said it earlier, grace. That was the majority of what I saw last night.
Yeah, it was overwhelming. I mean, the scene outside the hospital, but then the stadium and the silence and the reverence for the moment, it was frightening. But it really does go back to show, I think, an important point about, Republicans and Democrats do their best to divide this country, yet sports can bring everyone back together. And that's what I saw. I don't care what background you were, what race you were, what party you vote for. Didn't matter last night. Everyone united behind Damar Hamlin and his well-being. I thought it was poignant. I thought it was inspirational. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us that, this is why we talk about sports on this show. This is why we love it in a lot of ways. It is a great unifier. And I think last night proved that. And now we just continue to think about Damar Hamlin and his situation and hoping for a great outcome. Chris Pronger, 1998, took a puck on a slap shot to the chest. Looks like the same thing happened where he suffered commotio cordis in that moment. Heart stopped. He was revived by an AED. He's fine. Lived his life normally. Hutton, that's what we're praying now for Damar Hamlin in this situation, is that he has the same outcome. We had Dr. David Chao on to talk about it. He's optimistic. He's hopeful. He even mentioned the fact that the ambulance stopped for mom to hop on the ambulance is a good sign. It would have been rushing out if things were worse. So we're hoping for the best outcome now.
Well, there was a Nashville Predators player who collapsed on the bench. Or was it? No, the Preds were playing the Red Wings. That's what it was. It was the Red Wings player, Yuri Fisher, back in 2005. He collapsed on the bench, and they ended up postponing that game. Now, the difference between the scheduling and all this, which made it not easy based on the situation, but easy based on the calendar, is they just made back-to-back, home and home, and they restarted the Preds Red Wings game wherever that game ended up. I can't remember who was leading. But they had that one night and then followed up likely in a different city the next night, and that's how they made that game up. But there was the same – everyone's wondering, what was going on, especially from the local teams. The difference is you had a purely national audience with this last night, and everyone's reacting in real time, trying not to speculate, at least I think the majority of us. And there was not a lot of information. Still not a ton of information, but from what we've been able to gather from what they've released, more positive out of this just based on the fact that he's got his marketing team that is released. And by the way, not a verified account, but the guy this morning was on Good Morning America representing the family, the Hamlin family, saying that the vital signs for Hamlin were normal. That's great, but he remains in critical condition at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. We'll have more on this, plus look to some other headlines as we wrap up the Tuesday edition of OutKick 360 next.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys, because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well, with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say, more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam, so that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had to actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests, because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But, they just, I don't know, they just were different folks. And it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust, just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy's literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like, if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, oh, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for a while. So you're trying to make do of it, and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. Granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out, because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around, and everything else, at a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
Our thanks to all of the solid guests today. Dr. David Chao, Armando Salguero of OutKick, same for Chao, who's a contributor there from Pro Football Doc, John McClain, and also we had Jay Skurski on, Skurski, from the Buffalo News, who was awesome and had coverage last night. More throughout the week for sure in regards to coverage and reaction as we have updates with Bill's safety, Damar Hamlin, and the outpouring of support from across the league and the country.
Can I pass along something from my cardiologist buddy
Yes.
that I found interesting
absolutely.
that could be useful for people following this story? When I heard intubated, I immediately thought about the worst, with him, that it's a coma or something bad's going on. My buddy who's a cardiologist who was watching the segment with Dr. David Chao said this also. He said it's standard of care in most cases where someone suffers cardiac arrest to keep them intubated and put them on what they call a cooling protocol. That's in order to preserve brain function. We use mechanisms that allow the body's core temperature to drop, which we know from years of experience and research help maintain brain function and improves outcomes long term. This is usually a 24-hour process. And so him being on a breathing machine very well could be by design. It goes without saying, all speculation. I obviously have no clue what's going on. But if this was a patient of mine in my care and had commotio cordis as expected, he would be brought into intensive care, and this is what we would do with him.
And that's where he is. He remains in intensive care as the last update in critical condition. And
I just found that interesting that it could have all been by design, this part of the process. We don't know, but something to keep in mind that, we don't know, but because we're expecting the worst outcome doesn't necessarily mean that's the case.
And while, suffering cardiac arrest, once they have the heart is beating again, the next thing you worry about is the lack of oxygen to the brain. That's the next step. And they certainly had the best medical professionals there in real time, there to provide their assistance and their expertise in that area. We mentioned earlier, in any walk of life, there are few places better than what the NFL has set up every game day in case of emergency. And in this case, in case of life or death situation. The best of the best were on site in that moment to react as fast as you possibly could in that moment. And here's hoping that because of that situation and because of where it occurred, that the very best can now happen for Damar Hamlin in his recovery, which remains in critical condition. But so far, Chad, the small updates we've received sounds more positive than anything we would have thought in real time last night.
Yeah, Dr. Chao even said the best place for something like this to happen is on an NFL football field with the amount of professionals around that could help immediately and the equipment that's on hand at a game. So hopefully that leads to a positive outcome in this situation.
The other headline out there just across the league today, Jim Harbaugh, who just lost again in the semifinals in the college football playoff. So he was already linked over the weekend to the Denver Broncos.
Colts have been out there for a while.
Yeah, and Dockett said they absolutely will have reached out to him in some way. And now there is a report that the Panthers have also done so. Now, the Panthers have clarified this is not an interview. There has been preliminary talks. But consider what is at stake there with the Panthers, who had the interim head coach, and you have the spot where the team actually improved, shockingly, after getting rid of some of their better players and firing their head coach. And Harbaugh is going to be highly sought after. And to me, the first storyline is after receiving the compensation of over $9 million in an extension around this time last year. It was a couple of months and maybe a couple of weeks after where we sit right now. But after receiving the multi-year extension with a considerable raise, the ability, and now the reports from The Athletic, that if he finds a spot and he's offered a job, that he's going to take it in the league. And I wonder why now, compared to last year, for Harbaugh to get back in the NFL where, I mean, the Raiders, for instance, they were one that was linked to him last year.
Well, he interviewed last year for the Vikings.
And the Vikings, yeah.
Remember, he was all the way down the rabbit hole with them, and then
they got the extension.
Decided that I'm going to go back to Michigan, but really he didn't get the job.
Well,
were the reports.
And the Dolphins. But then the Michigan man connection, there was something there with what was going on with Dolphins ownership and Harbaugh, and whether or not you were just trying to keep him out of Minnesota. If he's going to leave, you're going to leave for Miami. And if you don't leave for Miami, then we're going to keep you there. You know, it's been an odd 13-month process with Harbaugh.
Well, I don't think it's that odd. Let me break this down and why I don't think it's very odd with him. He sucked for a while, and Michigan came to him and said, instead of firing you, we're going to restructure your contract and make it more advantageous for us if you are willing to bet on yourself going into this next year. He did that, probably begrudgingly, and didn't love doing it. But he did it because it was his alma mater, and he believed in himself, believed in his program. Comes back the next year, they crush it. They go to an unexpected playoff game. He gets renewed. He gets a better contract, but he's still interviewing and flirting with the Minnesota Vikings. I wonder why. Because he wanted to be in the NFL anyways, and now that one season of success could have propelled him to do that. He had an out. He tried to take it. He didn't get the job, so he signed up for more money with Michigan. He was fine staying at Michigan if he had to, but he wants to go to the NFL. Fast forward to the next year. They go about doing it once again, undefeated, beat rival Ohio State again, win a Big Ten championship. They get upset in the college football playoff. His desire to get back to the NFL never left. So now if he's got more opportunities, he is going to wage negotiations amongst all of them and pick the best one if he gets multiple offers. I don't think any of it's that crazy about what's gone on. He bet on himself. He won. And he's played it to the best of his ability ever since. And he got exactly what he wanted out of Michigan a year ago, having talked to Minnesota. And I think what he ultimately wants is to get back to the Super Bowl, get back to the NFL, then get back to a Super Bowl and win one this time. The one that he lost to his brother in the Ravens when he was with the 49ers.
I mean, I really, based on the success level of the last 2 years, though, and where he has elevated this program to not just competing for a Big Ten championship, back-to-back Big Ten champs. And let's be honest here, they're one more win over Ohio State away from, I think, a majority of people around Ohio State wanting Ryan Day out of there. That's where he is. And I don't know, if Michigan comes back to the table and offers him something, what is he going to do? To re-up him again? That's the other scenario here is why do you let him go now, even though you wanted him gone 2 years ago? There's no way you find a better option than what he's built given the circumstances and what he's done in that conference, especially with what's coming into the conference and the fact that we're headed to a 12-team playoff.
Well, here's what I beg of Michigan to do. Don't give him another raise.
Well, okay.
He's not going to leave for another college job. If he doesn't get the NFL job he wants and comes back, fine. You're working under your same contract. There's no need to give him a raise. None.
And I wonder, too, if Harbaugh goes to Indy, who's the GM? Saturday?
John Robinson?
I don't know. We are back at it tomorrow.
Marvin Harrison?
Further coverage of Bills safety Damar Hamlin and the latest headlines
James,
across the OutKick network.